Good morning and welcome to the Eclectic Radical. I'm Chris Richards, the Eclectic Radical, and with me today is a friend of the show, Seth Sturm from West Virginia. Seth, tell me about where everything is going right now in West Virginia. Check in.
Okay, check in. I've been on your show a couple of times, and each time I've been talking about myself and my issues with the Democratic Party and the racism and discrimination that I've experienced as the chair of the Indigenous Caucus. It seems that things have been ramping up, escalating, and other people are starting to get and experience the same discrimination I have. And there's been, since the last time I was on your show, a slew of things that have happened involving the chair, specifically the chair and executive director, Chair Mike Pushkin, executive director Ryan Frankenberry. They've been kind of making all of these unilateral decisions. So what I want to talk about, just kind of lay it out, is not only the discrimination that we're facing, but the way that they've been capitalizing on the chaos that's gripping the committee to make these unilateral decisions, abuse their power. And, you know, a lot of minorities now are calling for an independent investigation from the DNC. There's precedent for this. Just right now, there's an investigation into Alabama's diversity caucuses and their affirmative action plan. So there's a lot going on in West Virginia. And if more people were aware, maybe we could get somewhere. And also, I filed a grievance against the chair of the party, the executive director, and the chair of the affirmative action committee because of the way that the Indigenous Caucus has been treated. So we can get into that any which way that you want.
Well, let's start with the way the Indigenous Caucus is being treated, and then go from there into the way everybody else is being treated. That seems like that's a straightforward story progression.
Okay, so I don't know what we've talked about last time I was on your show, but I'll just give a quick recap. 2021, the Indigenous Caucus is formed. I was elected as the first chair. We did a lot of good work. We were met with a lot of hostility from the party and a lot of interpersonal attacks and racism that we experienced, a lot of the members. But so right now we're actually filing a grievance because last month in April, we reformed. Last year we had disbanded in the hopes that we could spur the party or the DNC into investigating our claims of discrimination.
I remember that. You came on the show to talk about why you disbanded. That was the first time you were on.
Oh, okay. Yeah, okay. So that's great. that's we disbanded hoping that we could spur action, right?
Yeah.
And we never received word from the chair of the party. They never acknowledged our resolution, our vote to disband, our resignations. They never called for new elections if they were going to keep the caucus. It just kind of went into the background of everything. And so last month they had released the bylaws committee of the entire party released some draft bylaws. And in there they addressed the Indigenous Caucus. And members of the caucus and I kind of talked about what had been going on. And I consulted with somebody that I trust who's a parliamentarian. And they suggested that we call an emergency meeting and reconsider our previous motion because the last bit of business that we did in the last meeting we had was to disband. And because the party didn't respond to our request, there had been no action taken. And because there was nobody to replace me, I was still serving as my role of chair technically. So, you know, a little bit of strategizing, we'll say, led to the decision that we would call this meeting and reconsider the motion. And again, this was up to the Indigenous Caucus members. I can only bring that motion forward. If no one wanted to do this, we wouldn't be doing this. This isn't a Seth Sturm decision, okay? That's something else that we need to make clear. The caucus disbanded together there's 10 active members of the caucus. Given the size of the population of Indigenous people in West Virginia, we're one of the largest caucuses, right? So we have all of these people who decided, let's try to take action to get the party to do something about our claims of discrimination. That failed. So we said, let's claim our position back so that we have representation within the party. So that's what we did last month. We voted to reconsider that motion. And when we called the emergency meeting, I received a cease and desist letter from the party, from party chair Mike Pushkin, and it was declaring that they wouldn't recognize anything that we did, basically. So we did that. We called for new elections. That was one of the first orders of business. And to do new elections, you have to publicly post the meeting for 30 days or something like that, right? They won't acknowledge the fact that we're calling for new elections. They won't acknowledge the fact that we had this meeting. So we're filing a grievance. I am on behalf. I mean, I don't know if I don't know what I can't. I filed a grievance. I think it was on behalf of the Indigenous Caucus. It was definitely by me, the chair of the Indigenous Caucus. And what we're saying is that the party heads, the party leadership, specifically Chair Mike Pushkin, Executive Director Ryan Frankenberry, and the chair of the AAC, Selena Vickers, by not recognizing the Indigenous Caucus's vote and including us, not noticing our elections, and by not including us in the recent elections within the AAC, that they've undermined the 6 basic elements of an open party, which are basically what were used. Those 6 elements were cited by the reformers, and that's how we got these caucuses in the first place. So now the party
the AAC is the Affirmative Action Caucus, correct?
Affirmative Action Committee. The Affirmative Action Committee in West Virginia is made up of the chairs of right now 8 diversity caucuses, 9 diversity caucuses whenever the Indigenous Caucus gets our recognition back. So right now what we've done, like, let me just say this, I filed this grievance with the West Virginia Democratic Party's Board of Appeals. I don't expect them to decide in my favor, but what I have done is I have copied the top DNC officials on this grievance so that they're aware of it, because we are calling for an investigation and audit into everything that we've been talking about for the past 2 years now, right? We have all, just for me in the Indigenous Caucus, we have a lot of evidence to back up our claims. The Black Caucus, Marianne Clater is the female chair of the Black Caucus. She has been really active in fighting this discrimination, and she's been calling it out recently as well. So there's been this movement of people that have finally started calling out the new chair for engaging in really discriminatory practices, and like I said, making these unilateral decisions. The whole purpose of the Democratic Executive Committee is for all of these people who represent all of the different areas of the state to come together and decide what's best for the party and best for their constituents. And right now we have a system where 2 people ultimately are making major decisions that affect the entire party and can make the entire party look bad, make us lose ground with minorities. You know, that's one of the things. You take how this would look to somebody who's a minority, a racial minority, a Black and Indigenous person, and how they're treating us, and it's shocking, and it really decreases morale. And if we're the backbone of the party, like they always say, that just flies. Their actions don't back up their rhetoric. It flies in the face of what
the Affirmative Action Committee is fighting for you guys, right?
So no, that's why we included Selena Vickers, the chair of the Affirmative Action Committee. And so one of the things that's important to understand is that this Affirmative Action Committee has been, since its inception, a majority white committee. There are caucuses that in other states wouldn't be caucuses, specifically the senior caucus. In other states, they have a senior council. But in the Democratic National Committee's charter, again, one of the reasons stated for affirmative action is to increase the participation of 3 categories of people: women, minorities, and LGBTQ people. Oh, and youth. That was written in the 70s. It wasn't LGBTQ people, it was youth. So having a senior caucus that has voting rights almost negates the voting rights of the youth caucus. So this Affirmative Action Committee is, again, majority white. And one of the things, I'm kind of getting off track here, but one of the things that's important for people to understand, this committee is so broad in its definition of who qualifies and who is in need of affirmative action that the only people ineligible for any of the caucuses and to be a part of the Affirmative Action Committee are white males between the ages of 36 and 54. That's only 12% of the population of West Virginia. 88% of the population of West Virginia is qualified for one of these caucuses. And You can see this in the affirmative action plan, which, by the way, did not have any representation from the Black or Indigenous caucuses. Any affirmative action plan should have representation from every group that is covered by the affirmative action plan. So the West Virginia affirmative action plan is not representative of BIPOC individuals in the state.
It's interesting that by the sheer weight of numbers, the people who have benefited the most historically from liberal affirmative action are white women.
If you look at the elections from the AAC, the two groups that have won a seat every time and most of the time have controlled the AAC have been seniors and the women's caucus, specifically white women from that caucus. So if you look at the numbers, again, seniors they already have over representation within the party. And women in the state of West Virginia, and perhaps other states, I'm not sure exactly how this works, but in the state of West Virginia, it's law that the committee in all levels of the Democratic Party be split by gender 50-50. That's been codified into law. So you have this situation where these other caucuses, like my caucus, one of our major goals is how do we increase the numbers on the executive committee to increase representation for Indigenous people. The women's caucus and the seniors caucus, they don't have that same urgency. They don't have the same quota that they have to meet. They're free to do a lot of work that these other caucuses that are comprised of more marginalized groups aren't able to do. And that's reflected, if you look at our affirmative action plan, in the goals that they set. The women's caucus by far has more goals, and none of them are about how to increase representation because it's already done. So this caucus is running the affirmative action committee, helping pass rules that exclude Black and Indigenous caucus members from participating in a meaningful way. And you can see, like you said, they're one of the largest recipients. They've benefited the most from affirmative action. And I'm not saying that they shouldn't. I'm not saying that we don't need to have more representation from women, but I'm saying that it dilutes the people in West Virginia. 3% of the population is Black, 0.5% is Indigenous. We are much smaller minority than these other groups, and the issues of the larger body where we're trying to combat that and have more representation. We're having that same problem on the micro level within the AAC, and it's really difficult to get ahead.
Yeah, no, and it almost seems like it's designed to keep the same kinds of people in power, which is the relatively, and I use the term relatively because let's remember, folks, this is West Virginia, but it seems like this primarily represents the interests of the mostly white Charleston crowd that runs the party.
Right. Now, I see the question up on the screen. Would it be more productive to work towards a party outside of both crowds? I do want to address that.
To get there.
I really want to address that, though. That's one of the notes that I had down here. In places where the Democrats have control, I think that that's where you're going to be able to build a stronger third party. In West Virginia, we have a supermajority GOP that really is as fascist as they come. They are proposing bills that harm people in a very real way, and we have no opposition party. We have no opposition to it. The Democrats are the only thing right now that even has remote chance in 2024 of stopping some of these people, but they're never going to do it. I guess I'll say we, because I am involved, we're never going to be able to do it if we don't energize people and motivate people to come out. Right now, you're seeing a shift in this party in West Virginia. Like, there were headlines last year when leadership changed of how progressive things were going to be. You're seeing a shift to the right now. We just lost the vice chair of the party, a Black woman from Morgantown who helped fight for police reforms, and that was one of her main goals. Now she's the head of the ACLU, where she'll continue to fight. But the issue is now we've replaced her in the party with the lawyer for the Fraternal Order of Police who helped fight the Citizens Review Board in Morgantown, where the former vice chair was from. One of the reasons she cited we didn't need an oversight board in that town was because the Morgantown Police Department already operates at the highest standards. Mm-hmm. We're seeing this shift they want to combat what everyone says. Oh, they're defund the police. They're scared of these of these
Well,
attacks. Rather than message the right way to reclaim that narrative, they're running like they always do to the right in an attempt to gain seats.
but
It's not going to work. It's not going to work at all. And we're just going to see more problems, and it's
I
coming right up.
I want to raise a few things on this point, because Mark is saying some things in the chat that make sense. And also because if there's no effective opposition to the GOP in West Virginia already, and the so-called progressive leadership of the Democratic Party is sinking into the same sort of corrupt racism as the conservative leadership of the Democratic Party they replaced, then, I mean, that's almost the place where you need a third party more than anything else, if only so that someone can oppose the GOP, because the Democrats aren't doing it.
They're not doing it. Okay, so in West Virginia, we're relatively small. I know people like Marianne Clater. I know that there are really good people who are already involved in the party.
Sure.
I think that in this situation, I'm not opposed to people doing that. My position is that my work, where I've been doing the work, where I want to continue to make some sort of change, is in this party. If there's you look at the Mountain Party and these leftists here in West Virginia, there's a lot of class reductionism. There's no minorities in these parties, and we're not going to be able to gain a foothold there. I'm about organizing in this space with minorities, I guess I'm saying. And there's already a lot of momentum behind the scenes. If we could capitalize on that and make changes at the top levels of the party and get some of these seats back to where we can at least have people stop them from putting forth trans bills that deny health care, then that's where I'm working. I'm not opposed to other people doing the other things. I mean, but this is where
I'm just noting that IF is doing a lot of work in that line of thought, and it appears that no matter who's in the top of many of these parties, being at the top of the party changes you. You don't change the party.
Well, I'll say this. So in West Virginia, we knew what Mike Pushkin was.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the thing. So they had this narrative where they're saying that there's been this progressive change. It was never a change. It was the old guard continued. So there has never been that change. You say that the party will change you, that being at the top of the party will change you. The problem is that the people we allow to get to the top are not the bold people. Like I'm saying, okay, for me personally,
sure, this is the Harold Ickes crew. We remember that,
right? And so that's what I agree that there is a lot of if being done here, but the same could be said for fighting for a third party. I could expend all of my energy and fail in that regard too, and not make any difference or any change. There's no blueprint. If there were, we wouldn't be having these conversations. So I'm not saying I'm absolutely right. I'm just giving my position and my reasoning for being involved in the way that I'm involved. So I don't think that anybody's going to, I support it. I support it if it happens. But my goal is to help fight the discrimination and the racism within the West Virginia Democratic Party and give these good minority community leaders a chance to rise up. I mean, we've been kept down at every level of the party, and that's something I feel needs to change. And that I think
my concern, I guess, is about people like you and people like Marianne Clater who are working very hard to try to make the change that is necessary, continually grinding yourselves up in a system that does not welcome you and does not want to listen to you and is going to keep trying to put you back in your place. And
this is okay, go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I think there's a real risk of becoming so involved in that struggle for representation or power in the party that you just get wrecked by it. And I don't want that to happen to you guys. You're good people trying to do the right thing.
I'll tell you, that's very real possibility. One of the things that we should discuss is something that just happened recently. We were talking about the new vice chair. I don't want to name her. I just don't. But she was up against a black woman who was running for this position. And there was there's some online things that suggest that this candidate was pro-life and anti-trans. She has since come out and said that she is not those things, that she had allowed people access to her account when they were running, when she was running for candidate, and she didn't check. She wasn't monitoring what was being posted. She was poor informational security, right? And so she's trying to say that is not my position. I'm sorry for what happened, but that's not me. I'm not those things. And there's been this smear campaign. So what happened was members of the committee had smeared her beforehand, selectively sending this online information that they found to make it seem like she was pro-life, anti-trans as a reason to vote against her. She never got a chance to address those claims. And I don't mean to speak for her, but she has said this publicly, I believe. It's affected her in such a way that she's considering leaving the party.
Sure.
Now, that's very, what you're talking about is very real. I know for a fact that Marianne Clater deals with this emotional trauma, let's be real, from what's happening. And it's for a minority, it is taxing, let's say. It's truly, it's a difficult thing to do. I'm a glutton for punishment. I don't mind when people attack me. It's just, I don't know. I just can handle it. Excuse me. But that doesn't excuse the behavior. So again, that to another point is why I feel like someone like me who can withstand a lot of that mental turmoil, because I've been doing it and I continue to do it. And I know that I'm fighting for what's right. I know that I am just. If someone like me, if you don't have that ability and you don't want to stand up and fight, well, I do think that there's other places for you to be, to do your work. I think that this is, like I said, I think that there's a multifaceted approach that takes all of these considerations takes all of these factors into consideration, right? So there is a lot of trauma that comes along, and anybody who has experienced that understands the difficulties that come along. It can impact your life, right? So anybody who's involved with that, I agree. I don't think that the party politics is the way to go. And I don't think that my work will change the world necessarily. I just think that it's important for there to be the pushback on these discriminatory actions in every organization. So if the Mountain Party's doing it, I hope somebody involved with the Mountain Party, Green Party speaks up. The Republicans, they're never going to speak up probably, but I hope someone does.
So I'll be honest in that, of course, you're right. There has to be someone to call out what's happening inside the Democratic Party in order to shed a light on the contradictions of the Democratic Party. It's just that the party, I really believe in an institutional sense that the party is always going at the national level, maybe not at the state level. I mean, I think it's worth trying to take over the West Virginia Democratic Party, though it's also worth remembering that when folks in Nevada took over the Nevada State Democratic Party, the Nevada State Democratic Party just stole all the money and opened up their own rival Democratic Party in competition. It's not, the institutional power is going to continue to stay with the people who control the system.
Yeah, that is a big problem. I'm not going to push back on that point completely because you're right. But what I will say is that the Democratic National Party has lost its way in a lot of ways too, right? They have left red states to fend for themselves.
Yes.
As they don't think that we're viable in terms of
what we're seeing in West Virginia is like a microcosm of the National Party, while at the same time it's the excuse that the National Party always makes for people like Joe Manchin, which is this, well, it's this red state, so we have to run right to have any chance at all. Well, so what has this Joe Manchin strategy done for the West Virginia Democratic Party? I mean, so let's see. Joe Manchin's been in the Senate, but all his colleagues have been Republicans. The governors have been Republicans. The state house has been a Republican majorities and supermajorities. They got Jim Justice to run for governor as a Democrat. He won as a Democrat. Trump killed an investigation into blowing up mountaintops, and Jim Justice went Republican again, just like that, because he's the guy who blows up mountaintops for a living. And now he's going to run against Joe Manchin for his Senate seat, I hear.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, listen, it's a mess. I'm not the Democratic Party. This party in this state has, like I said, been abandoned by the National Democrats, and they have allowed racism and all of these right-wing ideologies to infest the party in their pursuit of winning. They think that's the way they can win.
And the West Virginia party has become the Joe Manchin party because he's been allowed to amass all this power and become the power in the party, because he's the only senator from West Virginia who's a Democrat. He's the senior Democrat in the state. That gives him a lot of influence already. Plus, he's a rich guy who's in with the donor networks, even if he's not personally as rich as the Jim Justices. He knows all the other coal barons who give money to both parties in West Virginia. And so he's the machine. And people need to recognize that he's a machine boss, and that the only way that anything is going to happen in West Virginia, even with a third party, is if someone actually takes the fight to the West Virginia Democratic Party machine. And I'm glad you guys are doing that. I just worry for you.
Well, and I'll say this. It is a lot. I have received, not threats, I wouldn't call them threats, but I've had people tell me I need to watch out. I don't necessarily buy into the threat to that's one of the things people said about me, is they were worried I was going to do something to harm them. I don't see that happening, but something that people say about the party leadership, and I don't believe it myself, but it's just, that's the kind of thing that they put in your, well, and there are people out there who will do other things. I had a subscriber on my Substack, and I'm assuming it's a fake email, and it was bad. The email was something at gmail.com, and the something was just vulgar about me. So it's not like there's not a lot of personal nonsense that goes on with it. I mean, even looking at the structure of the party, we just elected the Democratic Executive Committee, who I'm calling out, just elected to one of these higher up congressional executive committee seats. I'm not sure if it's a DNC credentialed position or not at the moment, but the person who was elected engaged in outright racist attacks against his opponent last year when he was running for the West Virginia House, and he lost. Cody Thompson, he said that he wanted his Hispanic running mate or opponent to work in his field so he could see what it was like to be a real West Virginian. And
Wow.
Right. And this guy also claimed to be Indigenous while he was in the West Virginia House, while he was on the AAC with me, and in a way to say that I had no right, he had as much right to talk for Indigenous issues as I did. And after he lost his election and probably thought he was done within the party, he posted his DNA results, and he had no Indigenous ancestry. And when he posted it, he put a dig at me, and he called me a name. a really inappropriate, really vulgar name. And these are the people that they'll allow into the party while saying I'm toxic. So we see this pattern.
So
And
let's be
yeah,
honest, because I know this from talking to other people. One of my friends and patrons, Melanie Darigo, ran for Congress on Long Island in New York. Melanie is great. The fun part is that that's actually George Santos's district now. So they could have had Melanie Darigo instead of George Santos. And instead, they nominated a corrupt Democratic dork who couldn't make anybody like him, and they got George Santos. And
right.
this is also Tom Suozzi's district, the guy who left Congress and let Republicans have the district essentially in order to run for governor because he thought Kathy Hochul, of all people, Kathy Hochul was too conservative. I mean, sorry, too liberal. My apologies, too liberal. Kathy Hochul of New York is too liberal. And so this is the sort of thing we're dealing with across the Democratic Party everywhere, and Republicans win because of it. This sort of thing is why George Santos is in Congress. But the whole thing is Melanie is labeled toxic for being a progressive standing up for ordinary people. Like you're labeled toxic for being an Indigenous person standing up for Black and Indigenous people in the Democratic Party in West Virginia. This is a pattern.
Yeah, it is.
The toxic people are not actually the toxic people. They're the honest people, the progressive people, the people who actually want to make some sort of difference in the way that the party claims it's supposed to.
Yeah, you're not wrong at all. I mean, the two most smeared people by the party right now are probably me and Marianne Clater. And that's because, well, actually, that's not entirely true. The woman who ran for vice chair has definitely just received a bunch of criticism from these people. And I do want to circle back around to that issue because one of the things that 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 blows my mind is that there were a lot of people who I saw explicitly say that the woman who was running for vice chair, the black woman, she's no Danielle Walker. And that's the black woman who left the position open.
Yes.
That in of itself, okay, so that's racist in and of itself. But then to say that in defense of a woman who actively fought one of the policies that Danielle had fought for, and I just think that shows the level of disregard they have for actual issues that regarding minorities.
They
not,
clearly want to reward the Fraternal Order of Police.
right.
I mean, that's obviously the case when you describe that. Everybody, I did put Seth's Substack, since he was talking about it, in the chat. Takeastand.substack.com.
There's a lot of I've been focusing on West Virginia in my writing. I used to do a couple things just to try to get people to subscribe, and maybe I'll do some things here and there. But my focus really is on West Virginia. We have a lot of problems here, and it's so much bigger than just me. And I think that people need to understand that, when we're talking about these issues, one of the things that's always said is that I have a personal vendetta against these people, but I need people to understand. And they dismiss the actions taken against me as not being racist. It's about me, right? But what people need to understand is that when you leverage the mechanisms of oppression and given your position of power against your enemy, who happens to be from a marginalized group, that's racism in action.
This raises the question: if it's not about racism, why are all the toxic people Black and Indigenous?
We've been asking that question a lot lately.
Because it's just you tell on yourself. You tell on yourself when the people who violate your standards of civility are all the people that the standards of civility were invented to exclude.
That's the other thing. I believe that I said something to that effect. It's one of the things that people have to understand is that there are definitely instances where I have been angry, and that shows in some response that I've given. And that's something that I've worked on, because it's not that my anger is unjust, it's that people don't respond well to it. So that's something that I've worked on. But at the same time, it's hard. It's difficult when you're in this position and these things happen to you that are just outrageously concocted, and you can tell how insidious these actions are. It makes you upset.
People up the hierarchy. I think this is important for everyone to understand. This is something part of the educational portion of my show here. People up the hierarchy will always use civility language to label people down the hierarchy from them who are complaining about them and who are justifiably angry at them of being violent and inappropriate.
There are plenty of examples of that having happened with not just me, others as well. But, one of the things that was spread about me was that one person who's a Morgantown, this is the area I'm from, clearly, but a Morgantown city councilman made claims that I was a violent criminal. And I still, to this day, have no idea what they're talking about. They won't tell me what they're referring to because they said they don't want to re-victimize the person that I victimized. But I don't know what the story is. I don't know who it's about. I don't know what I supposedly did. But these are the types of rumors that are spread, and they're believed. Just like with the Zandria who ran for vice chair, the accusations against her were believed without her having a chance to respond to them and denounce those positions and say, that's not me. I am the exact opposite of that, So we have this higher standard that we're held to, and it's more difficult for us to address the grievances that we do have because we're less likely to be believed than our counterparts. That's why somebody who's engaged in outright racist attacks against not only Republicans, but Democrats as well, is able to get past and be a member of party leadership. But when I send a letter out to the Democratic Party, they say to ignore me because I'm a toxic individual.
And this is where I want to highlight the contradiction for everyone. This is the party that we are supposed to vote for. When we think of the marginalized people, treating the marginalized people like garbage for not doing their bidding.
That's exactly right. If we were to fall in line, we would be praised. So one of the interesting things, to go back to Zandria, who was the woman who ran for vice chair, in the AAC elections that we were excluded from as the Indigenous Caucus, she was approached by the chair of the AAC and I don't want to say she nominated her, but she was approached by her and talked to about running for one of the at-large positions that would put her on the executive committee. The chair of the AAC backed her and told her she would back her for vice chair as well. Okay. This is a position that, at least in the way that it looks, this at-large position sits below the chair of the AAC. It's a subordinate position in a lot of people's minds. When Zandria ran for vice chair, the chair of the AAC voted against her. So she wanted her to be a black mouthpiece for her, ostensibly. Again, this is my judgment, Seth Sturm's opinion, based upon the experiences and my interactions with this person. But whenever she was going to be in a position above her, there was no support for her. And we don't know who all received the fake survey that said that she was pro-life and anti-trans. We don't know who sent it or who received it. But
didn't it originate with a hate group?
So that the survey that went around did originate with a hate group. The ADF, can't think of what it stands for off the top of my head. Hate group. They're anti-LGBTQ. They're anti-abortion rights. They're a terrible organization. But this is the group that the website was owned by, which was spread around to these committee members. Yeah. And here's the important thing to remember about this. Democratic Party, I mean, anything done in a political sphere, whenever everyone in the public should be involved, should be an open, transparent process. They should have brought this before the committee, brought it before Zandria. If that's their reason for not voting for her, if they're going to engage in a smear campaign after the fact to go along with what they did beforehand, but not bring it up in a public hearing where people can, in an official capacity, that's anti-democratic. They didn't give her a chance at all to respond to it either. So
it's not even just anti-democratic, because you've got this hierarchical system, of course, that's designed to short-circuit democracy, but they're even short-circuiting their own hierarchical system in order to favor themselves and keep themselves at the top of it.
Right. They're sowing discord. They're creating chaos by, I don't know who sent out this email, but it's somebody that we can probably assume at least knows these folks, because if you send something to them, they will ignore it if you're not one of them. So we can assume that it's somebody involved. They sent this out with the intention of pitting committee members against one another. They selected only certain ones to receive it. This chaos, this distrust that they're sowing among committee members enables them to make these bigger, broader decisions and almost guarantee that nobody's going to bring it up at a meeting because they've got all of these other issues that they've got them focused on. No real work is being done at these executive. They're going for 6 hours sometimes at these meetings, and the only thing they're getting done is passing what their bylaws committee has drafted or doing elections, all of these procedural things, but they're not actually proceeding to do anything, right? So we need action, I guess is what I'm saying. We've got a party that's embroiled in scandal. They don't have any incentive to take action. They have every incentive to keep the status quo and to keep their positions and to just let things fester.
Does any of this have anything to do with why they lose elections, I wonder?
It does. I mean, isn't it clear that this is, when you have, like, okay, let's just back up a little bit to go broader. You take a look at Joe Biden being elected. We were promised. How much were we promised? And there's been a failure to enact any of those promises.
He hasn't even been able to save the post office.
Yeah, there has been a complete failure to do anything, and people are looking at that and saying, "Wait a second, why am I going to go out there?" And you might get them to vote for you, but are you going to get them to do anything? And organizing, to affect change. I'm not one of those people that doesn't believe in voting. I don't necessarily believe the presidential race is the most important race. I do believe that voting is important, right? And so we have to assume that there are ways to organize effectively and to get good people into office, especially at the lower levels, to do some things in our communities. And that's kind of what my focus is. We have a lot of local elections that go uncontested. And this is a direct failure of the party to organize any opposition, right? They're focused on all of these things that they shouldn't be focused on, and they're failing to do the basic duty that they have, which is to make sure that we get to win elections. And they would rather go uncontested than to put someone else they don't control. That's the issue.
Let's look at the national level and the last time the Democrats had a supermajority in Barack Obama's first term. So the Democrats had a supermajority, and that supermajority included Teddy Kennedy, who was too sick to serve in the Senate and who was dying of brain cancer and who did not resign because holding on to power until the last moment of his life was more important to him than being able to, than having a functioning supermajority. And the rest of the Democratic Party just allowed that to happen, much as they're allowing something similar to happen with Dianne Feinstein now, in a situation where they have a very slender majority and every vote matters. Mm-hmm. And you look at this, and you look at this at the national level, and you see them play these games where not offending someone who's just determined to hold on to power until they die is the polite and collegial thing to do. And remember, Senate rules require our national senators to be collegial. So when Bernie Sanders was saying, my good friend Joe, that's because Joe used to be a senator. And Bernie Sanders still feels like he has to be collegial towards Joe Biden because they were senators together. And this is also why you saw people who aren't necessarily that progressive support Ed Markey against Joe Kennedy in the Senate election back in 2020, because that Senate collegiality matters more than their normal political divisions, because you're in the Senate with these folks. Now, keep in mind that this collegiality is also between Republicans and Democrats, and is the reason that Democrats always compromise with Republicans to pass anything they can possibly pass, whether it helps us or not.
Well, and that almost speaks to an issue that I've been talking about a lot with Marianne Cleater, which is some of the inaction from these individuals is wanting to maintain that social status.
Yes.
It is a lot of it is bonding over being in these positions.
Yes.
And it creates this mentality that doesn't favor, like I said, action. It favors the status quo. It favors to maintain that level of respect, even when it's not deserved. You allow somebody at the top to get away with the worst of the worst because to speak out against them is bad for your career, or against the rules in the case of the Senate. And that's what it is.
And then you get things like the Senate is the greatest deliberative body in the world. And it's like, okay, so what does it mean to be deliberative? It means you're spending all your time arguing and not actually doing anything.
Yeah, exactly. We have a crisis of inaction, not just in my state, but across the country. And that's something that I really want to see change. I don't think that we're at a place now. I mean, honestly, I think we need to take a step back and honestly take a look at what's different now than what was different just 10, 15 years ago. Yeah. Are we not at a place now where we're so divided and things are so fraught with tension that it feels like we're on the cusp of something not good, right? So I don't know. I'm not saying that it's inevitable. I'm saying that there's a definite need for change, real change, and people are going to start feeling that.
This kind of division and gridlock and political impasse where nothing can change and everything favors the status quo no matter what you do. This is the system under which liberalism turns into fascism, and somebody is given emergency powers to get things done, and then the things that they get done turn out to be really bad.
That's one of my main. That is one of my concerns. I don't know that we're going down a path, and it's just to circle back around. Like I said before, there are so many instances where people are warning about what's going to happen. We can see it. We can see the signs, right? But we're not being heard. And
they talk about history. You want to talk about history rhyming? In Nazi Germany in the 1930s, a man who went to prison for trying to overthrow the government ran for president. Now, Donald Trump hasn't gone to prison, but we have a person who tried to overthrow the government running for president in 2024. Now, you can say all you want about whether or not you think, you can talk all you want about whether or not you think people with the right kinds of politics should overthrow the government. I think there are good arguments for it. That said, what does it say about our system that someone who tried to overthrow the government to stay in power is running for president again, and everyone's allowing him to do so. And if Joe Biden loses, he will protect democracy by giving up power peacefully to someone who tried to overthrow the government to stay in power.
Yeah, it's really bad. Okay. I don't know any other, just to put it so plainly, we're in a situation where somebody who completely distrusts the system is using the system to gain power again, right?
Yes.
And not only that, we're watching as Democrats make the same exact mistake they made in 2015, and they're saying we are going to back Trump because we already beat Trump. We can beat Trump again. That is the greatest mistake we can make. And I'm telling you, it's not speculation. I've heard people say it. This is the talk among Democrats.
It's why you keep. I watch Morning Joe because it gives you an idea of what people in the Beltway are actually thinking. And one of the things Joe Scarborough has been saying every morning lately is that Trump is a loser, that the GOP are losing because of Trump. And this is really the image that Democrats have in their mind, that Trump ultimately plays to their advantage, and they're able to do a lot of things because of Donald Trump. And because they have that belief, they don't feel incentivized to change anything.
Well, I mean, honestly, this should terrify a lot of people. We don't know what. I mean, like, again, the GOP in and of itself is a bad organization for sure. We know what kind of criminal behavior and anti-democratic beliefs this particular person holds. And I have problems with our system. I have problems with a lot of things in our system. But one thing that is different is that he engaged in criminal activity to try to keep his position as president. Whether or not that's been, and he's indicted or charged with whatever, we know this to be true based upon the evidence that's come out, right? So this is uniquely dangerous, and his followers have such a disdain for the American government and just the way that things operate that they can be inspired to outrageous acts easily. And
let's keep in mind too that none of the people ostensibly running against him for the Republican nomination, none of them are willing to say that overthrowing the Republic is bad. Again, I am not a fan of the Republic. I am not defending the Republic. However, these are people who have taken oaths to protect and defend the Constitution. And the Constitution, and this is one of the reasons that I'm a Garrisonian and I have problems with the Constitution, the Constitution guarantees every American a Republican form of government. Now, what that means is that every congressperson and senator who's refusing to call out January 6th is in violation of their own oath of office. And it's grounds for throwing them all out. This is why Republican senators keep saying January 6th was bad. People like Mitch McConnell and John Cornyn, because they, even though they're horrific people, they understand their constitutional oath and understand what they have to say to be in compliance with it. But they're not running for president, and none of the people running for president are willing to say that. And plenty of people in Congress and the Senate have supported or minimized the January 6th in some way. So you think about that, and you think about their oath to the Constitution and what the Constitution says. And even if you yourself do not believe in the Constitution, it is important to understand that these people do not value their own oaths. People who do not value their own oaths cannot be trusted.
that is a great way to put it, because the hypocrisy of I always say it's the rules for thee, but not for me. They have all of these rules they won't follow. They have all of these procedures they won't follow, but none of those things ever apply to them. And it almost goes back to what you're saying about the civility and the way that that goes downhill. It's the same thing. If I say something to a party leader and they're having a personal crisis, let's say, and this has happened, where today is the anniversary of something bad that had happened, and that's used as a way to say, you shouldn't have said this. Well, I'm sorry, I don't mean to denigrate or to disrespect that in any way. I wouldn't have said anything had I known, but I didn't know, right? So it's not an offense for me to have done that. It's not offensive, in my opinion, to have done that, but they act like that's offensive. And then other issues that are offensive to me, not offensive. So it's that same the way that it goes downhill, and it's weaponized. And it's the same thing with these senators, right? So they know that this is against the law, but it's their guy, right? It's their guy, so they're not going to say anything.
Now I'm going to give you a counter example, though, because this same thing, the oath of office, the guarantees in the Constitution about a Republican form of government, these same oaths of office are why you won't ever have a progressive Democrat in Congress or the Senate who calls for a general strike or who calls for a workers' council to replace the Senate or anything like that, because they take that oath seriously and they are actively prevented from working against a Republican form of government. They have chosen to be bound by their oath. Now, what that means is, on the one hand, they take their oath seriously to some degree, but at the same time, they're willing to take these oaths seriously for the sake of the oath and the institution, while their political opponents say, let's burn everything down. And that fools people who understand that things need to be burnt down and don't understand that Republicans don't actually want to burn anything down.
Right. Yeah.
So, and this is why you have Democrats thinking that they're going to win because of Trump. But it's why there's always the potential for a nasty surprise. The reason that labor leader Eugene Debs founded the Socialist Party of America in the first place was because he had supported Grover Cleveland for president as a Democrat. And Grover Cleveland had called out the National Guard to break a railroad strike. So he supported Benjamin Harrison for president as a Republican. And Benjamin Harrison called out the National Guard to break some other strike. I believe it was a mining strike. So you have the leader of one of the major labor leaders of the country supporting one party and then switching to the other party because of a betrayal, and then that party commits the same betrayal. And then this is where Debs started saying, I would rather vote for what I don't want and not get it than vote for what I don't want. I mean, I'd rather vote for what I want and not get it than vote for what I don't want and get it.
Well, there's definitely, that is, if you're being honest with your with what's morally right, you're probably, listen, as a Democratic Party official, I probably can't say that morally you shouldn't vote for Democrats, but morally, probably shouldn't vote for Democrats, right? But the issue
morally, you shouldn't vote for Democrats or Republicans, which is really my point. If your motivation is morality, then you shouldn't vote for Democrats or Republicans, and you shouldn't play the morality card. If your standard is improving people's material conditions, then you still shouldn't vote for Democrats or Republicans, because they only improve the material conditions of the rich.
And again, I would say most, like I say here, I would support Marianne Cleater.
Sure.
if Paula Jean Swearingen runs as a Democrat, she's got my full support. Or an independent, I probably full support. Don't worry about it. But my point is that if they were to decide to be a Democrat, there are people who I know are good people and would do the job the right way. That is not universal, right? Those are anomalies.
These are the people the Democratic Party has labeled toxic.
Right.
I mean, there's always someone in Paula Jean's mentions saying something horrible just because they hope someone in the Democratic Party will notice them and smile.
You're not wrong. I mean, that's that culture of the social club aspect of it all that we want to that I'm fighting against, right? Like the way things are right now, you're absolutely right. And I don't know, again, if things were to change in West Virginia, it would be anomalous and unique to just West Virginia. It would be the people here who I know would enact, because we're so small that it's possible, I think. But that's my thought process.
I will say that I think you can improve material conditions for people in West Virginia in small ways that do matter by electing Democrats. I think that Michigan and Wisconsin have shown that. Wisconsin, they elected a judge. That judge means the potential for overturning a bunch of gerrymanders and reinstating the actual fair electoral maps in Wisconsin. Sure. Michigan now is a blue state in its state government, and they have the power to completely throttle and stop any sort of LGBTQ plus or abortion bans, and they're using the power to do that. So that's good. And I think that that's the sort of thing that people should consider in states where maybe supporting Democrats can make a difference at a local or state level. I'm not going to tell people not to do that. I understand. I don't want to minimize the importance of those things. At the same time, we are never going to improve the material conditions of the people who can't afford an abortion, even if it's legal, without significant help, unless we change the way our government handles healthcare. Unless we change the way our medical system handles healthcare. Unless we change the way our insurance system pays for healthcare. All those things have to change in order to ensure every person their right to a safe and free abortion on demand. And you will even hear Democrats say, I'm not for abortion on demand. So you have to keep all of these factors in mind, and you have to remember that when you're talking Democrat or Republican, you're talking very, very small gains and very, very big losses.
Okay, so I want to go back to what I said about not more, morally shouldn't vote for Democrats. And I mean that in the sense that the people who moralize everything by saying, well, I vote for Democrats, the vote blue no matter who types.
Yep.
That's what I'm talking about. Yeah. You don't have the moral high ground just because you back Democrats. A lot of times that masks a lot of the problems. Yeah. To me, you have to search out the ones who can make a difference. And again, I support all third party, not all third parties. Okay, what was I to say? Back that up.
Yeah, but I stay away from the independent caucus. That's all I can say.
Yeah, there's actually a lot of people who are trying to do third parties that are problematic. That's a real issue. But anybody who's doing something good, I do support that wholeheartedly. We need to have more options. The fact of the matter is that having this dichotomy is creating a lot of the corruption that we're seeing. If there were more options, a more broad dispersal of power, you wouldn't have those concentrations that create the monsters that we have. So that's a major issue moving forward. Again, I'm looking at this like triage. In West Virginia, my work, what I can affect change in the areas that I can do it, it's here. That's how I view it. I don't mean to discourage anybody else or tell anybody else how to do their activism. It's going to take all of us to make any kind of change and to avert serious disaster. I don't mean to be an alarmist, but I really do believe that what do we have? 10 years before things are really off the rails in this country, tops. I mean, I think looking back historically, people, if we don't change course and really make positive political changes that are important and that you see actionable works being done, you're going to look back at this as the definite start of the time when we began splitting and began factioning off into the groups that will make it. I don't, Civil War, I say that. I don't know what it'll look like, if it'll be as violent as it has been in the past, or if it's just a split. I don't know what happens. It's just that
already, in my opinion, I say in my opinion because I'm not trying to incite anyone to do anything. I just want people to be aware. We are already in a slow burn civil Cold War, which breaks out into outbursts of what I would call white terror. And it's important to understand what white terror is, to get back to the educational part of things. Yes, in America, white terror has an obnoxious double meaning in the fact that it's usually white people and white supremacists who are responsible for white terror in America. But what white terror means is anti-communist terror by reactionary forces. It's a more technically accurate and historically correct term for Nazism, white terror. White terror is what happened in Russia, in the areas controlled by various white army factions during the Russian Civil War. White terror is what was carried out by various factions opposed to communism in their attempts to prevent the Bolsheviks from successfully creating a government during the Civil War. White terror exists. It happened in Finland, where during their civil war, the White Army released a shoot-on-sight order, allowing them to summarily execute any prisoners taken from the Finnish Red Army. And these are historical factors that are important to understand when we look at the way terrorism happens in the United States and who its victims are and who its perpetrators are. The biggest terrorists in America are cops. Cops are supported by the state, and the white supremacist terrorists that we are supposed to believe the state will defend us from are allied with the cops. So all of this has to be taken into account. When we talk about defunding the police, we talk about defunding the police because by defunding the police, you are also defunding and disarming the Nazis. And it's this white terror right now that is the biggest threat to any sort of organizing, because people are afraid to get killed. People are afraid that if they take too much of a stand, that there'll be some mass shooting near them and they'll be one of the people shot. These are real fears.
There was a drag event in a town near me, and I knew several people who were too afraid to go. They really thought that there was the possibility,
which is the
and there is the possibility, violence.
Which is the purpose of that kind of terrorism, to make people afraid to go to the kinds of events that are targeted, so that people stop holding those events.
Right, and
it's really how the cycle works. That's why people can. That's why Republicans during the war on terror felt so comfortable telling Americans to have a Big Mac for freedom and to not be scared and to accept certain risks, because it's that it's this whole idea that that if you just don't be scared, you're winning. The problem is that it's not enough not to be scared. You have to do something.
And let's be real, there's a big difference between Americans going back to business as usual after 9/11 when the threat had died down, as there is from putting yourself in a situation that may be the target of terrorism, right? So it's really more brave to go to these events than to go buy a Big Mac or whatever. But
it's true.
It's raw. This is the situation we're in, and like you're saying, this is the time when people will look back. These acts of terror are the first shots, really, of this civil conflict. Let's say,
Civil Cold War. It's the hot spot, the proxy wars of the Civil Cold War.
Yeah, that's exactly right. We have this situation unfolding that we're witnessing, and it's not being brought to the it's not as taken as seriously as it should be by a lot of folks, and it's being ignored. And ignoring it is only going to create a bigger problem down the road. And I think that's why it's so important for people on the left to take such a strong stand in support of trans issues, in support of access to abortion. Any oppressive legislation that comes down is another chip away at the foundation of our peaceful existence right now. The more that they sow those seeds of discord and get people riled up, the more they take from us, the less resources we have amongst each other, the more apt people are to commit those acts of violence. And I don't know the answer to stopping it other than to hope that, like I said, action starts being the main focus of people in power. And I think that it's going to take a lot more negative things to happen to spur that action. But hopefully things don't go too far before they take it. I mean, honestly, this is a situation where I really do think we're in an existential crisis in terms of the United States as we know it. Okay, maybe we're not talking. It could just change in terms of the structure of the country. We might not see massive battles, Civil War type battles, but if we just see a fracturing of this country, that in and of itself is a major problem.
We're going to see a return to the oppressive methodologies of the 1970s. We're going to see a return to these oppressive methodologies by the police. We're going to see a return to these repressive methodologies by local politicians.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to see a return to these repressive methodologies by national politicians. We're going to see a return to these policies by business. This is the enemy that we are fighting now, is this return to the repressive methodologies of the 1970s by the neoconservative Democrats who pioneered them and their heirs in the Democratic Party, while at the same time, the Republican Party openly embraces actual fascism. So this is the contradiction of our time, that we have the electoral choice between the repressive methodologies of the 1970s and actual Nazis. Now, on that note, I want to let Seth go. I don't want to take up all of his Sunday. And then I've got a little bit of a closing monologue, and I will let you all go too. Thank you very much, Seth. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me, Chris. I love telling people what's going on because it matters.
Yeah, Seth has a great blog about West Virginia, about the West Virginia Democratic Party's political twists and turns. Takeastand.substack.com. It makes for good reading. It's good to know what's going on. It highlights the contradictions of the Democratic Party. Thank you very much, Seth. Have a great Sunday.
Thank you, Chris.
And folks, on that note, I really want to talk a little bit about what's going on at the national level with the Democratic Party and how it is a mirror of what's going on in West Virginia. Because we have a presidential primary where the candidates are the sitting president, who is one of the original 1970s neoconservatives who started to apply these oppressive methodologies in the first place. That's Joe Biden, of course. We have a self-help guru. Now, I want to be really clear about this. Marianne Williamson is a self-help writer. And what is it telling us? That a self-help guru is the progressive candidate. Think about that. Known for her charity work. Again, think about that. These things are important. How charity and self-help apply to the world we live in matter, in understanding that she is the progressive candidate. That's our choice. Or so we're told. And then you've got Bobby Kennedy Jr., who is a anti-vax activist, given a new lease on pretentious faux seriousness by the ridiculous reaction to the idea of public health protections for disabled people and essential workers. So it's not even a case of it's anti-democratic that there's no debate. It's anti-democratic that these are the candidates in the Democratic Party. Think about that. And, have a great week. And remember, I'll tweet at you. Bye.